co-host Joy Silver has let me know, and I can't wait for the details, that America is in an abusive relationship. It's just days before, weeks before the presidential election, but ballots have already gone out, and we're all at the edge of our seats. And I've got Joy Silver coming up, and we're going to talk all about it.
And as much harm as he has already caused, a second Trump term would be even worse. Donald Trump's friends in the United States Congress are trying to pass a national ban.
So many months ago, I launched the Snowstorm, a hot topic show with the pure focus of the upcoming elections and protecting democracy. And it ended up being a monthly show. The last Sunday of the month, I've been coming to you with Joy Silver. And she is an amazing ally of political force. The last Sunday of October, however, in this same time slot, I will be broadcasting the Palm Springs Pride Parade live. And we will talk about politics at the beginning of that broadcast because the parade starts at 10 a.m. The Pride Parade will start at 10 a.m. the last Sunday of October. But I'm doing a multi-camera live broadcast of the Pride Parade this year. And in the first half hour of the broadcast, we will dive into the latest political news right before the election. If you are watching live and have a question or comment, you can type it into your social media, and I can see it on my control panel and curate it into the show. Also, I want to invite you to support this show by becoming a monthly donor for as little as $3 a month. And anytime someone new does that, I give them a shout out on the show. So I want to welcome Roy Pitluck. He has become a member of the Skip a Latte Club, which is $10 a month. And I really appreciate that. Also, you can miss a lot of my shows if you don't subscribe to my YouTube channel and also use the Get Reminder or Set Reminders feature. So if you are logged into YouTube, go to Settings and Reminders, and that's how you will do that. And so that's what's coming up. And in just a moment, Joy Silver and I are going to be spending the rest of the hour talking about the important issues of the day, so I'm going to get my announcements out of the way first. This particular shirt is the crux of the Hopeful Sexual campaign, and it is designed to inspire authentic human connection while simultaneously combating sexuality-based shame and stigma. And the really cool thing is, if you go to hopefulsexual.com, it takes you to an Amazon store where this shirt is available in all sorts of styles, sizes, and colors. And I use the revenue to fund PromoHomo.TV. So check it out. I think almost everyone is a hopeful sexual, don't you? without further delay, because I cannot wait to talk to her, let's welcome to the screen Joy Silver. Hey, Joy.
Hi there. How are you today?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing very well, very well.
So I was thinking, as a single person, I don't have someone to wake up with and drink morning coffee and watch the Sunday shows. And I'm glad that once a month I get to sort of wake up with you.
Oh, thank
And
you.
I will have already watched Sunday shows by the time we have this conversation. But no, you're very important in my life, but you're very important in the lives of Californians, because you are on the front lines of the political fights, um, and you have been for a long time. So I appreciate that during this very important election season that's been going on for months and months, that you've carved out time to be with us.
I really appreciate that, Nicholas, and thank you for your very kind words. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this Sunday morning thing that we do, and also what I usually do in most of my mornings. Most of my news now comes from listening to others' podcasts. So I go through a tremendous listening period, and I usually do my exercise program, which means I'm walking the neighborhood. And I want to just talk about walking the neighborhood for a second.
I
Um,
saw a post. I saw your post. I'm not gonna tell them, but I saw your post. I know what's coming.
well, maybe you do. But I will say this. Um, there's a major thing going on in my particular neighborhood that is quite exciting for me, and it is the magnitude and proliferation of signs for people and for kind of candidates. And my particular neighborhood, from my point of view, of course, and this is what our show together is about. What is our point of view here? But it is mostly and only for candidates that are Democrats and that are fighting for democracy. And many of the posters and signs and lawn signs do say "saving democracy," or "obviously," or I mean, they're almost tongue in cheek, but they're out there, and it is unbelievable how many there are. And so every day I call it looking at people's flower gardens, right? Of course, and so these flowers continue to bloom in this desert, and I think this is really and a most important thing. So there's that piece of it. So I don't know if that's the part that you were talking about,
No,
but
there's a particular sign that you posted about, and
oh,
you asked your
oh
Facebook
yes,
followers
yes, yes.
what should
I,
you or should you not?
yeah, and let's go into that one a little bit. What Nicholas is referring to for our listeners today is that on my in my Meta suite, I posted and asked people to weigh in on there is a neighbor, just one,
A
one
brave neighbor, a brave neighbor. You have to
person.
give him that.
Yeah, there is a bravery there. And they are the only one who are posting from the MAGA set. So you have two signs, one for congressional candidate Ken Calvert, and the other sign is posting for Trump Vance. They're not huge, they're not big flags, because some people do actually in this neighborhood have flags out now, which is really kind of interesting. But and so I asked people, do I connect with those people? They're my neighbors. And my curiosity in
When
this,
you say neighbors, are they right next door or down the
no,
street or across the block or in
yeah,
the
they're
subdivision?
about, I'd say about a block and a half. But it's a
Okay.
neighbor for me because I certainly know all of the neighbors that surround them. And particularly the people who live across the street from them. So, and I pass them, and they are part of my walking trail. When I'm walking, they're part of that pathway. So, and most people, I mean, many people told me don't bother this and that. But why, you may ask, would I want to ask them? I'm not looking to persuade them to change. And let me just start with that. I don't need them, especially in this neighborhood, not to do what they're doing. And Nicholas, you made a really good point. It's a very brave thing to do, you know, or a very dumb thing to do. It depends on how you look at it. They are not cowed by the opposition position that surrounds them in this entire neighborhood that I walk for at least 2 hours every morning. So
Wow, you go,
yeah,
girl. If you don't
yeah.
mind
So
me
I'm out
referencing you
there.
as a girl.
Yeah, well, and I get out there, so that's a big surround, right? And so I really have a good idea of having not seen any other signs in that trajectory, and I spread it out. I don't just go around the circle and several times. I'm out there. This is a really big thing. So my question really is, why? Why are they on board for MAGA values? What brought them to that, and how do they see it? And most people, I mean, there was all kinds of ways to behave with them, and don't bother, and you're just going to be frustrated. You know, there were a lot of points of view, and I still really haven't determined, do I bother or not? But it's still a question to me. How do people, especially living where they live in this environment, come to the conclusion that this is a really good idea for them to subscribe to MAGA values? And so therefore their leader in the communication of those values. How does that happen? So I haven't really come to terms with do I, don't I, but you're right. There are many, many points of view. Some thought I should take negative action. I am not doing any of that. Some think I should do nothing because it is just a waste of time and they won't change their mind. But I'm not looking for them to change their mind. I just want to know, how do you come to this conclusion? So
You
do
know
you have
what?
an opinion, Nicholas?
Well, you know what comes up in my mind is that, you have these neighbors that have huge differences and they may, as the result of it, never talk to each other, except during the zombie apocalypse. I bet people would be willing to overcome their political differences to survive during the zombie apocalypse. But then the next question is, which neighbor is most likely to become a zombie first? And maybe some already are.
You know, that's an interesting thing that you're saying now. Um, and even though you're saying it sort of, you know, in a humorous way, there is something we can point to right now that, let's see what happens in Florida. Okay, because they actually, I'm not saying it's a zombie apocalypse that they're
It's a
going through,
huge crisis.
but it is a huge crisis that is almost
Hurricane damage and you
Armageddon
just
style
right.
destruction. And the thing about that is it's taking a great toll on much of Florida. If it isn't directly a hurricane, there's still the rest of the weather that would be categories, a lower category 1, 2, and then there's just rain itself that's going to cause flooding. So this is a major, major issue in a state that is sometimes called Trumpistan.
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 I hadn't heard that before, but it certainly makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I heard that maybe on Pod Save America or something. But in any case, it's not my phrase, but I have adopted it because I like it, and I'm sure you may take it on too. It is a quite interesting. So here you have the zombie apocalypse, as it were, and because many people in Florida were very tied into mega values, right? And now the plan to go forward, espoused by Magites, Magites, I don't know if that's a term, we're talking about it now, is to eliminate all of the things that would help someone through that disaster that they're facing, right? They want no more weather, no more hurricane alerts, no more, I mean, all of the items that were designed to help people, including alerting them to the coming of the disaster. These are the things that are being written out of the 2025 plan. So it's a big moment to be discussing this, because does that change their minds? Can they even go back home and vote? I mean, that's a whole nother question. So how does Florida get carried in the moment by those people who are stable enough to even get their vote through, because some people don't even have a home, right? So this will be one of those moments where we get to see afterwards, how did it work out? Did the actual disaster, and let me just say this, I know you're ready to make a comment on this, but one of the things that constantly comes up in the name calling aspect by MAGA and by candidate Trump is that he calls the Democrats or Kamala herself, Vice President Harris, a socialist, Marxist, fascist, which first of all, you cannot be all of those things because
Some of them contradict.
they're diametrically opposed, actually. But second of all, the programs, the social programs, like, aren't they going to want FEMA? Aren't they want the Coast Guard? Aren't they going to want all of the things that are basically the programs that everybody contributes to in order to help people when they need it in general? So all of them would be considered socialistic or socialism, not exactly socialism, because that would infer that the government has the means of production, but it is indeed a program that functions as a social program. And these are the things that that they want legislated out. So there's a lot to, it's going to be quite the educational process, I think.
Well, I know we're all at the edge of our seats. Now, I forgot to mention at the top of the show, because I promised them I would, that if you see this in time, the 4th annual Pride in the Pines is happening in Idlewild this coming weekend. And if you go to prideinthepines.com, you can check it out. And Idlewild is a beautiful 1 hour drive from the Coachella Valley, and it's a very fun small town pride in the mountains. So for our listeners, Joy, basically the week before another episode is coming up, I text Joy and I ask her, what she wants to talk about, and does she have any suggestions for headlines for our episode? And she generally presents 2 or 3 and gives me a choice, and I volleyed back to her and I said, literally, it's up to you. You choose. And so the headline that she chose, which I didn't want to talk with you in advance, Joy, as I told you in the green room. So the headline you have chosen is America is in an abusive relationship. And I'm just going to show the graphic that I created for that. America is in an abusive relationship. And if it's coming from Joy, it's a fact. So let's discuss the fact that America is in an abusive relationship. So, Joy, let me go to that shot. Take it away.
Well, I think we're kind of getting to that in this segue of the disasters, the responses, what will happen to help people, keeping them from aid and money, and I'm using that portion to really segue into America being in an abusive relationship. And it's an interesting thing that one of the large issues of our time period, and from a historical perspective too. I mean, even prohibition in the early 20s was a reaction to domestic violence that women were facing. Why did I'm giving a little bit of historical perspective on this. Why did women and the suffragettes and women's rights, why were they all attached to prohibition in that time period? And it was about the invention of spirits that became, and strong alcohol, right? It wasn't, people drank beer and mead and wine, and but to get to that spirits moment where they discovered that rum could be made and bourbon could be made and all of that, this came much later. And the amount of the percentage of alcohol in the alcohol of the time became great. And so what happened was many of the husbands of these women were battering them, and domestic violence was at just a crazy time. And this was on the change from agricultural communities to industrialization. Okay, so there was a lot of shakeout about how people were going to make a living and what was going to be available to them. So prohibition was a response to domestic violence of the time period. Okay. So, and that was violent, particularly violent physical violence, and more than that, but basically battered women and their children. And oftentimes the men would take the money and then drink it, and then the children would be left to starve. So there would be that. So in thinking about this, and we see this dichotomy, and we constantly are getting numbers about how close the election is, which is baffling, I think, to many people, probably on both sides, and a lot of, and it's really a black and white situation. But when you start to look at something in a black and white way, it's already in the domestic violence cult, which I'm going to get to too at the end of this laying out of this storyline. So some of the characteristics, right, of domestic violence, and why do I say America's in this relationship? Because we are constantly in this relationship with the head communicator of MAGA values. Okay, and that what does that mean? We constantly are hearing from the candidate, the head of the party there, regular criticism, name calling, and put downs. This is a characteristic. Now, everything I'm describing now are some of the characteristics, because there are many of them, but I'm picking out a good deal of them that describe or elucidate this particular way of looking at things. It creates unsafe or fearful feelings. And I think there's both sides are involved in unsafe and fearful feelings. We feel, and I say we, meaning we who are non-MAGA people or in democracy supporters, right? We feel unsafe by what we're experiencing through
And traumatized.
But there's an unsafe and traumatized. But on the other side, they they're fearful of what's going to happen to them if we don't stay with the abuser. Okay. So we have something of use of intimidation or manipulation as a means of control over a victim and his or her children. We're constantly seeing outpourings of intimidation. I'm going to prosecute anybody who thinks differently than me. I mean, the intimidation level is just off the Richter charts for domestic violence there. The isolation from friends, family, and community. There's an isolation factor where you're with me and you're the family, and I'm the head of that family, and everyone listens to me. I mean, this is the description for the abuser, and we're constantly seeing this. So you're isolated from having any other points of view, right? So a good deal of that's going on. Threats to hurt family, friends. This is constant. We're constant. Anytime the abuser mentions or identifies the group, that group then becomes hurt or threats, and talks about how it's going to be a bloodbath. I mean, the language is there for us to hear. Repercussions should you think differently. And here's one that's really that I had to put a big star on: deportation or immigration status threats, right out of the books of domestic violence. Public or private humiliation. So if you're in the MAGA party or family, then you will suffer public humiliation, and certainly private humiliation among the peers or leaders or people who are considered not loyal enough, right? And then, of course, the public humiliation of anyone else outside that party or those values. Denial of, this one is kind of interesting because this comes to policy. Denial of food, clothing, or medications. So basically saying you're out on your own, we're not helping you. We don't, we don't want Obamacare, meaning you can't access medications. All of that, no school lunches. We don't want to provide school lunches. All of this is denial of food and medications, right? And then, of course, we have erratic mood swings, which I think we're treated to on a daily basis of the communicator of these values, candidate Trump. Possessiveness, the demand of loyalty. And it's not loyalty to the values of MAGA. It's not loyalty to the United States. It's not loyalty to, it's loyalty to the abuser, the head abuser, the person who's communicating, this is how, this, I am the abuser, I'm the head abuser, in fact, we even heard somebody call candidate Trump, Daddy Trump. I think that was probably very telling there. And
Probably the person that had the Trump tattoo on their face.
My God, right? Belief in personal superiority. The greatest, the most wonderful, the smartest, constantly seeing those kinds of things.
Speaking of superiority, did you order your $100,000 watch?
Isn't that amazing? This is the economy, and
you can look at your $100,000 watch to see if it's time to read your Trump Bible.
These items are on sale to people who are talking about inflation is too high and eggs are too costly.
Right.
But yet, sneakers I can buy.
Right, exactly.
I mean, that is that's a hard one to understand.
Joy, I've come to using a stress ball during our show. I'm like squeezing it.
I know.
No. It's just like, it's the reality of and also, frankly, everything you're talking about regarding abusive relationships is triggering for people that have ever been in an alcoholic relationship, in a codependent relationship, in any sort of relationship that is inherently sick and unhealthy for at least one of or both of the participants.
Yeah, you're right about that. And I think, but that triggering, and we'll talk about what are the results of being in the relationship and for any length of time, because how do you come to recover from that? But you're right. So that it is triggering to people who have been in a personal way are now having to deal with this constant since Trump came on the scene, this constant abusive relationship. So America has been in this abusive relationship since he came down the golden stairway, right? So this is not going to be an easy.
I wish we could flush him down his golden toilet.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, I want to just talk about two more items on the, and again, these are not all of them, but as you're hearing them, and anybody who's listening certainly has the experience, if you have the experience of being in any kind of domestic violence and abusive relationships with parents or others or intimate partners or whomever, constant belittling or put down, there it is there. And then, of course, the ever famous explosive temper.
I wish I had known, but it's probably obvious to anybody who watches a politically based show that this episode could be triggering. I would have said at the top of the show, this episode can be triggering, because, I think every human being has had an experience of an unhealthy relationship, and the way that you're bringing these issues to this national dynamic is, I think, brilliant and powerful. So kudos to you, and keep going.
Thank you for that, because, but I think that yes, it could be triggering, and maybe to let people know that. But on the other hand, why do I think it's important to put out there right
Oh,
now?
it
Because,
is. It is.
well, one of the reasons though is when you are feeling triggered, we can look at the overview of how many of us are in it together, right? And I think both sides are in it. Okay, one of the identifications, and this is certainly from the uh, certainly from many psychologists and psychiatrists and sociologists' point of view, there's often Stockholm syndrome identification, right, where the victim becomes identified with that person who is perceived as having the power, and so doesn't want to see themselves as a victim, and therefore identifies with the abuser themselves and becomes an abuser. Okay, so we have that going on. And in the zeitgeist of this cultural experience of being in an abusive relationship, at some point, we are going to need to develop a way to recover from this time period. And that is not going to be an easy feat because it would have to, it would be followed, the recovery would be followed by step one of this, and that is you have to accept that you're in an abusive relationship. How do you talk to America, the United States of America, and say, we've been through a period of time that is abusive? And what words do we find to use? And I'm interested to hear, I mean, if anyone is listening and wants to comment on that, what word or set of words can we use to say we've been through a traumatizing period? Maybe that's better than abusive. Maybe people are better with traumatizing than they are with abusive relationship because they may not want to credit.
I
Uh,
I want to take a little side trip here. So when you have codependent or abusive relationships, or you have people who are in need of recovery, there are there are participants who are described as enablers. So when you look at this abusive relationship between the mega forces and the dramatic changes they want to make to our nation to rip away the social support lifelines that need to be in place for a lot of MAGA people in Florida right now.
exactly.
One of the things that I want to ask you is, to what extent is the media an enabler of this abusive relationship?
Well, that's a good that's a really good question. What and I can see that. I mean, if you're going to the place where you're looking at media and seeing them as enablers, I think that that is definitely something we can consider because they are not necessarily framing it in the manner that we're talking about this now.
Well,
And
also and it's even happening now, and it drives me crazy. It's like, all right, we know that Trump is a convicted felon. We know that he has been held liable in the court of law for sexual abuse. We know he tried to overcome the country. And I frankly think that anytime any one of his surrogates is on CNN or MSNBC or any of these networks, that they should always be reminded of that, and they should be asked at the beginning of their punditry, why is it morally acceptable for you as an individual to support this person knowing all of this? So I feel like anytime there's a pundit that's on a mainstream news network talking about taking the view of the right as they do, that it just kind of really frustrates me that
Well,
that
you're
they
right.
treat it basically continues to legitimize this person.
Yeah, there's no accountability. And that's I think that is what makes someone an enabler, when there's no call for accountability. And I think you're right there. And in know who it is you're talking to when you're talking to them, and make them accountable for who and what they are and what they're doing. And then maybe there's a conversation to be had. But then just the idea of accountability, blaming the victim is also part of the abuse, you see. And so if somebody were to take that on, and I've seen a lot of the far, the extremists and the MAGItes talk about, when they're asked a question, first of all, they don't answer that question, right? And second of all, it's always someone else's fault. And this is really a part of, you made me hit you. If you had given me the sexual contact that I wanted, I wouldn't have had to fill in the blank, right? I mean, even repeatedly pressuring someone to have sex, when we talk about convicted of sexual assault, I mean, it's all there. But the accountability piece, I think, is ultimately going to be, there's two things: acceptance, and the only way to get to that acceptance is to hold people to the accountability moment. So you have identified, I think, the enabling piece of it, and the trigger there, or the platform of that, would have to be holding someone accountable for their behavior, and how it has affected the general public at this point. And it's different for both sides, because each side has been affected by this abusive relationship in one way or another, that it may not be identical, but the pieces are all of a similar pattern, of the pattern of domestic violence.
So just so you know, we have 15 minutes left
Oh my God,
to
just starting too. It's a
right.
big subject. Well, I do. So we've gotten to two things. Um, we've gotten to identify the characteristics of the abusive relationship, which I think, if you're listening, or if there are listeners there, and if you're in line with this, you can see the big picture of United States being in this relationship. The other thing is, to get to the acceptance, there has to be an accountability, right? So we have to know that this person has to be accountable for this behavior in order for us to move to, or we have to get to the acceptance point that this indeed is what's happened to us as a people. Okay. And sometimes it takes a long time for people to get ready to leave their abuser, and there are many reasons why they can't. And some of those things are, as they're in the leaving process, they feel isolated or lonely. They debate about going back to the relationship. Should I go back? They feel uncertain or unable to make decisions on their own. Okay. The feelings of anxiety or depression happen as you're getting ready to leave, or in those first moments of leaving, finding it difficult to feel independent, and constantly having a lingering sense of fear or sense of being in danger, and that can move into PTSD. And I think the country is going to have to deal with PTSD
I think we
over,
already are.
this time period. And so before we get too much further, since our time is coming to an end, I thought to myself, well, let me see what a cult is. Okay. And so some of the characteristics of a cult. The foundation of the cult's ideology can be in religious beliefs. I think we've seen that going on. Political theories. I think we've seen that. Philosophical concepts, lifestyle activities, all of these, and isolation. And what is isolation? America first, America first, America first. So there's your isolation from the world. These are the foundation of the group's ideology, that the roots of this, all of that is involved in what we're experiencing right now. So that would define what we're experiencing here is a cult is in operation. And I'm certainly not the first person to say that, but I'm talking about it in terms of domestic violence and abusive relationships, because they're parallel. It's on a bigger, it's at a bigger level, but indeed it is the same thing, because members are encouraged or forced to cut ties with family and friends. The group has excessive control over the members' lives. Fear is used to control the members. Black and white thinking, and I think we talked about that earlier. The group promotes a simplistic worldview, often portraying itself as good and the outside world as evil. No questions, no critical thinking or dissent is discouraged, and members must conform to the group's belief without question. And then there's love bombing. And, this is right identified with certainly when domestic violence becomes to the battering moment, where the abusive partner will batter or emotionally abuse, will belittle and shame, and then will come back with flowers, hit you and then give you flowers. And what do we see Trump do? I love you all, I love you all, after he's spent X amount of time belittling and humiliating people. He'll then tell the group that he loves them. So there's that love bombing thing. And then, of course, the jargon that goes on. They have their own, own speak, own phrasing, and loss of a sense of humor. The only humor that's acceptable is when you make fun of someone, when you belittle someone. There's no joy or joking at things that are funny about all of us. There's none of that. It's only belittling, and to support that belittling moment. And then the justification. People find ways to justify the group's action, regardless of how cruel, how hard-hearted, or how severe it may seem. And cults, and what you talked about earlier with abusive relationships, they target people who are in vulnerable situations. And this is what we've seen. We've seen people who are in vulnerable situations on both sides be targeted for these philosophies. So this kind of brings us to that moment in time when we need to explore steps to healing. How do we, it's a weird word when we talk about healing, because I don't know that these generations are going to be able to heal from this moment in time necessarily, but I think we're going to be able to find ways to manage what we've experienced. And I think when you're dealing with things like PTSD, it's really about managing, knowing how to find safety within yourself, how to be independent, how to form connections outside, again, how to find the support that we need. It's sort of a major therapeutic pathway that we have to develop here. And that's an awful lot to put upon the candidate Harris, who is virtually communicating that recovery. And so this is or it's at least my wrap on all of this, the wrap up of this. Why was Kamala Harris suddenly lifted up in a way that she hadn't been? Because she was promoting sense of humor, a joyfulness. She helped us regain the American identity, the flag, USA, all of the things that had become symbols of values that were not supportive to democracy, that had been taken from us, are now returned to us. That there's another way, that kindness, not violence, but support with each other, that we're all in it together. that we are a people, that we have hope. All of this is identifying the pathway to recovering from the abusive relationship we have been in for years now. And of course, this doesn't surprise me that that persona is coming in a female form right now, because you had the abusive father, and now we're finding, you know, the parent that's supportive of all of us.
I find it delightful that the person that is kicking his butt is a woman of color. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, by the way, are there any other really major points you want to get to yet?
No, I think we are now in that moment of how do we develop, how do we learn to accept this? How do we communicate with this? And then how do we hold those parties accountable so that we know we cannot blame ourselves for for the trauma that we've gone through. That's really important.
Well, we do have 10 minutes left, but before we get into your home stretch of this conversation, this is probably the last time we're on camera before a lot of people we know cast their votes through mail-in ballots. And there are very close races that are happening around the country, particularly in California, in which the future of our nation is in balance. So I just would like you to spend a few minutes talking about what you most want people to know related to action that they can take in the next coming weeks.
So in your local area, it is very critical that we spend time on candidates that are micro local, okay? And that would mean your water board, particularly your school boards, because a great deal of damage has been done on the school board level, and we know that that's been one of the targets. Education has long been a target of, if you target public education, then you don't teach history or critical thinking skills. So concentrating on our level to do texting, but most importantly, phone banking. And if you're not that kind of person that can do either of those things, you can become a neighborhood leader. And you can identify people in your neighborhood, and you can talk to them and bring them together and have a ballot party and talk about what it means and what the candidates mean. Because at that local level, that is what builds the wins at the top level. And oftentimes people say, well, we're safe here in California. Well, we're really not safe. We've ceded much of the ground to extreme ideas. And I say this again, particularly at school board levels, because those are the generations of how our children are going to become active citizens in their areas and how we're going to live every day.
Well, then speak to races such as the race between Rollins and Calvert. Speak to
Most
some
important.
of those races and how close they are, etc.
So there's a number of races that are close in California, but here in Riverside County, probably the closest race that we all have our eyes on is the Rollins-Calvert race, and that is the congressional level. Because California has about 6 races up and down California that can determine the makeup of the Congress. And we deliver those candidates, and we have a hold on Congress to move forward with. And so right now, Will Rollins is doing very well, but he needs your help to maintain the leads that he's eked out. The races are all of them are close in the field. Okay, so Will Rollins this is his second time around on this particular race, and that's a good thing. because it takes at least a race in order to get name recognition so that people know who it is and know what you stand for. And when
Well,
you
and
come
he
to,
lost by a very small
he lost by
percentage.
4 points. It's about a 10,000 votes. We need to be sure that he gets those votes. And in order to make sure that that happens, this requires talking to people, phone banking for him, and I go to another race that's really critical for the entire Riverside County, and that is Elizabeth Tucker for the judicial Riverside Superior Court. And the extremists are funding the extreme candidate, which is, I think he says his name is Foal or Pole. You may see some of those signs. People generally don't know anything about judges, but Elizabeth Tucker is our way into helping establish some justice in the Superior Court system. So this is a very, very critical race, and it involves the entire Riverside County. Will has a span from Corona all the way out to La Quinta. It's a large area that he's dealing with, and we have to keep pushing forward with that. And this is why I talk about the very local races, because when you win at the race at the lower level, and you know that voting at the bottom of the ticket for those candidates and knowing who they are, that's why we in this area want to know who it is that espouses the kind of democratic values that we have. That you win on the bottom, it goes all the way to the top. If you're only doing the top down, you're not establishing the safety levels of your everyday life. He
One
can
of
help
the
us on the national level. That's a
Mhm.
critical thing. But who is it that deals with your everyday issues that you're going to face in your life?
So what I do is I take the voter guide and I go through, and if there's anyone I'm not informed about, I look at who are groups and organizations that I trust endorsing. So the Stonewall Democrats, the Democratic Riverside County statewide, and I'll do a deep dive into who is endorsing, and then I might, if I don't get the information I need, I might see, well, who are the Republicans endorsing, and then vote differently. So there's all kinds of ways to do this, but please don't leave anything on your ballots unchecked, unmarked. So with that, we have 4 more minutes, and I would like you to use those 4 minutes however you want.
Oh, thank you. So, and I'm going to make a plug because Riverside County Democratic Party went through an intensive endorsement process. And those endorsements then became the state party's endorsements because they trusted our process to come to those decisions. So if you're not sure about the candidates in your area, you can go on the CADEM, as it's called, site, or the Riverside County Democratic Party site, and you will find who was endorsed at every single level in your area. You can find it with your address. You just put it in and they show you who's in your area for that have been endorsed by both the county and the state. And what is most important is helping people to remember to put that ballot in the mail, because they're going to drop on October 7th. And oftentimes people, this is why it becomes important for you to be talking to your neighbors, even if they think similarly to you. If they leave that ballot under a bunch of books
Magazines.
or magazines, or if you're still reading magazines, but if you just leave it somewhere or taped to the refrigerator. I've gone canvassing door to door and have found people left the ballot on the refrigerator and kind of said, I think you might want to look at the ballot and get it in the mail, just by being at the doorway. And oftentimes it's not foremost on everyone's mind like it is on yours, Nicholas, or mine, or probably anybody who listens to this. But it is important that people get that ballot into the mail, because we want to show early votes in our favor. Because on the end, when the counting part starts, that's where there can be questions about votes, but when the early vote comes in, that the night of the election, that's the most important moment in terms of how many challenges we're going to have later in this election. So please get your ballot, talk to people, make sure other people are putting theirs in there. And if you have even a smidgen of time or you have no time, certainly you can donate. Certainly all of the campaigns need money to get their message out. They're going door to door, they're printing pieces. But you can, like I said, you can phone bank, you can text, you can go to your local Democratic club, you can go talk to the candidates. If you go up on their websites, they'll show you how to volunteer. These are critical moments because we really are looking at a moment in time when we are fighting for our freedom. We're fighting for our freedom as a people.
Well, thank you, Joy Silver, for being on the show. I was particularly fascinated by your take today. I found that more so than any of our other conversations, I was basically sitting here listening for a lot of the conversation, which I really did like doing. And we'll coordinate to see if and when you can come back in November. The last Sunday of November of October is the Pride broadcast. I will be broadcasting live and can start before 10 a.m. There will be room for political conversations if you happen to be available. And thank you for all you do.
And thank you for all you do, Nicholas Snow.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for coming to my documentary yesterday.
Yes, it was a pleasure and very important work. This guy does important work.
Give my love to your beautiful wife, Atma.
I shall.
I love you both. And thank you all for watching. Share this, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and I will see you soon.
Love you.
In a safe place, I got room to